In the previous chapter, we were introduced to a man called Jeroboam. He was born in obscurity. He was not part of a royal line. He had no expectation growing up that he would rise to a position of ultimate authority in Israel. However, Solomon saw that he was an exceptional worker, and he promoted him to be in charge of the entire labor force of the tribes of Joseph, back in verse 28. Then a prophet called Ahijah came to him and told him that he would one day rule over 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel because of Solomon's disobedience in violating the code of ethics that an Israelite king was supposed to live by. Now, evidently, Solomon found out about this prophecy that was given to one of his high-ranking officials, and we read in chapter 11, verse 40, Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt to Shishak, the king, and stayed there until Solomon's death. So as chapter 12 begins, Solomon has died, and his son is about to take the throne. Now, here's where things get a little bit confusing. The narrative will now center around Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And it sounds like they're related, doesn't it? The Aboam boys, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. They're not related. You can remember them this way. Rehoboam was the rightful heir. Jeroboam was part of the judgment of God upon Israel. And he will rule the 10 tribes. And this is how that split between the 10 northern tribes and the 2 southern tribes came about. Believe it or not, this split endures for the rest of the scriptures. And so there was united Israel under a qualified king, and it lasted for a handful of pages, didn't it? From this chapter on, there is division between the north and the south. And this is how it happened. Rehoboam, the rightful heir, son of Solomon, went to get crowned as king. However, it seems that during that coronation ceremony, Rehoboam was challenged by this man, Jeroboam. He asks a particularly pointed question. Verse 4, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam answered, "Go away for 3 days and then come back to me." So the people went away. We talked a few days ago about the fact that Solomon was collecting more and more gold, but that gold was simply being used to inflate his ego rather than be stored up in the treasury for use in the temple. He had no reason to go on gathering this much gold, and here we find out that he did so by heavily taxing the people. So now he's gone, and the people are legitimately asking, "Are you, son of Solomon, going to reduce these crazy taxes?" And so Rehoboam gets some advice from his father's counselors, and they give him good advice. They say, "If you will be a servant to this people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." In other words, the role of a king ultimately is to serve the people. Some taxes have got to be collected. You've got wars to fight and services to supply, but show these people you love them and want to help them. Tragically, verse 8, Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. In other words, he's asking his mates, who are literally yes men, who do not have the wisdom or the assurance needed for such a question, and they say, in effect, "Well, Rehoboam, we think you need to show these people who's boss." And so he delivers this devastating news, verse 14, "My father made your yoke heavy, I will make it even heavier." And so in that instant, the northern tribes rebel against the descendant of David, and the future of the kingdom is fractured into 2 forevermore. Rehoboam, the rightful king, rules in the south over 2 tribes. Jeroboam, the illegitimate king, introduced purely as judgment for the sins of Solomon, he rules in the north. As the chapter closes, this northern king, Jeroboam, he is trying to reduce the risk of any of these 10 tribes reverting back and coming under the reign of Rehoboam. And so here's what he decides to do. He knows that that glorious temple of Solomon is in the south, and the requirements of God's law mean that everyone is supposed to go down to the temple on 3 occasions in the year for particular festivals and feast days. And so just look at verse 28. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." One he set up in Bethel and the other in Dan. And so he institutes an alternative religious system that centers actually around people's convenience rather than true obedience. Under the system that God created, only certain people could serve as priests, not anyone. And this man has got a very modern modification on that old system. We read, he appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. Our culture would say, wow, how wonderfully inclusive. Forget that narrow, exclusive, small-minded, bigoted way of doing things, Jeroboam might say. I say, come one, come all. Enlist as you please to become a priest of the Lord. Listen, both Rehoboam and Jeroboam were led astray by the bad advice of others. What a wonderful gift then, that we don't have to guess at who is right and who is wrong, what is wise and what is foolish. We have the very word of God. May God give us the humility to listen to what he says and do what pleases him.